They said the train wouldn't stop long in Idlebrush. No one boarded, no one got off. The platform stood crooked with rot, and the station master hadn't been seen in years. But when the last rail groaned and the wheels hissed to a stop that morning, a woman stepped down in a faded blue dress, clutching a letter that had already been read too many times. Her name was Clara Wren. She was 58, and she thought someone would be waiting. But the man who sent for her, the man who'd promised warmth, a porch swing, and a quiet life of companionship had vanished. No one greeted her. No signs pointed where to go. Only wind and silence and the ruins of a place time had forgotten. And yet, she stayed. Not because she had nowhere else, but because something in the stillness whispered, "You are not broken, just buried." What happened next wasn't fast. There were no crowds, no sudden rescues. But over days then, weeks, Clara began to sweep out buildings no one had entered in years. She baked bread for strangers who hadn't yet come. She planted herbs beside old stones where no garden had grown. She didn't rebuild the town. She reminded it was still breathing. But then just when new warmth was blooming, someone from her past appeared. Not to take her back, not to make amends, but to reclaim her like property. What did Clara do when the man who abandoned her returned with cruel intentions, and who stood beside her? When she had no one else, you won't believe how the quietest woman in the West lit a fire in the coldest place. Stay a while because what comes next might just stir something in you. They said the town was once called Whistle Bend. There used to be a saloon with blue curtains, a post office that smelled of cedar, and a church bell that rang like a spoon against fine china. But that was before the fever took the children, before the mines dried, before the men left and the women followed. What remained was dust and the echo of things unsaid. And it was into that silence that Clara Wren, age 52, stepped off the train with her one carpet bag and a heart stitched with hope. She wore her best hat, faded lilac velvet, slightly dented, and a skirt she'd repaired so many times the seams had begun to whisper stories of their own. Her boots were polished though cracked, and inside her bag was a bundle of letters tied with a green ribbon. Each signed, "Ever yours, Mr. Tobias Grinnell, rancher, widower, honest man." But there was no one waiting, no rancher, no wagon, not even a dog sniffing the gravel platform. Only wind, and boards creaking on forgotten windows, and silence so thick it rang louder than the whistle that had just trailed away. Clara stood for nearly 20 minutes, the ribbon clutched in her palm like a prayer bead. Not a soul came. The station master had vanished with the train. No horses, no voices, not even birds. She walked, past broken storefronts, past a fallen sign that once read, "General Merck," and now dangled by one chain like a crooked tooth. Her heart thudded, not with fear, but something older. Something she'd known since girlhood, the ache of being left behind. She found the chapel half collapsed. She stepped inside, not to pray, but to sit, to breathe. The air was thick with mildew and memory. And there in the pew, she let herself cry, not loudly, not for long, but with the grace of someone who'd done it before. She had known this might be a trick. She wasn't foolish. She'd read the paper stories of women sold, discarded, deceived. But Tobias had written of sunrise over red hills, of loneliness tempered by faith, of needing not a wife but a partner. So why wasn't he here? A floorboard cracked behind her. She turned startled, but it was only the wind. Or so she thought, because someone had been watching from the edge of the town. A man, tall, lean, with a limp and a life marked on his hands. But he said nothing. Not yet. Clara, for now, was alone with the ruin, and still, she stayed. She stayed. Because sometimes when you've been tossed aside your whole life, the stillness of a ghost town feels more honest than the noise of a crowded lie. And just beyond the silence, someone waits, too afraid to speak first. Clara Wren woke the next morning inside the chapel, the beam of sun slipping through broken shingles onto her lap like a quiet hand. Her eyes were swollen from sleep and sorrow. Her fingers, still curled around the ribbon of letters, did not tremble. They had weathered worse. She opened one letter again. The third one, the one where Tobias Grinnell had written about burying his wife beneath an aspen tree and how the tree still bloomed despite the loss. She read it twice, then folded it slowly. Her voice rasped the air like dust lifting from floorboards. "Where are you, Mr. Grinnell?" She stood brushed off her skirt and walked back outside. The town remained silent, almost reverent, like it was watching her, testing her. At the old livery, she found a half-collapsed stable and one mule still tethered to a fence post, dusty but alive. Someone had been here. Recently. A single boot print in the dried mud proved it. "Hello," she called. "Is anyone?" Her voice didn't finish before a man appeared from behind the collapsed mercantile slow as sunrise. Tall, gaunt, wearing an old coat patched at the elbow. His beard was more silver than brown. One leg dragged slightly in his eyes. His eyes looked like someone who'd lost too much to ever speak lightly again. Clara stiffened. He didn't say a word, just tipped his hat and looked at her like a riddle he'd long ago stopped trying to solve. "I was sent for," Clara offered, steady but soft. "By Tobias Grinnell. I'm meant to be his bride." The man studied her lips, pressing into a line. "There ain't no Tobias Grinnell," he said at last. His voice was hoarse, barely above the wind. "He's been dead near 5 months." It was not the words themselves that cracked something in her. It was the way he said them. Not cruelly, not with pity, just plain as if it were an awful truth that had simply sat too long without being spoken. She didn't faint, didn't gasp, just folded her hands in front of her. "I see. I'm Elias Boon," the man added after a moment, as if he owed her that much. "I worked his land for years. When Tobias passed, the mail kept coming. I never read it, just gathered it." He handed her a stack, her own letters returned by a hand that had died before it could finish its hello. For a long time they stood there, neither moving. The wind stirred the weeds between them like something sacred. Elias finally said, "There's no train till next week. You could stay at the house. Or here." "Your choice." Clara nodded. "I'll stay here. The chapel, the mule, the ruin." But that night when the wind howled through the rafters and the firewood wouldn't catch a knock came gently at the chapel door. And outside stood Elias, holding a bundle of kindling and a pot of stew. "Didn't want you going hungry," he said, not meeting her eyes. Clara took the pot. "Thank you." Still, she didn't go to his house, and he didn't push. He just left footprints in the frost the next morning from his home to the chapel, from one kind soul to another. But grief has a way of creating bridges between strangers, when both are too tired to run anymore. The next morning, Clara Wren found a broom leaning by the chapel door. It wasn't new. The bristles were worn and the handle smooth with use, but someone had wrapped the grip with fresh linen. A quiet offering, a wordless gesture. She swept the floor in slow, even strokes, more to calm her breath than for cleanliness. Each wooden board beneath her feet seemed to remember laughter, as if children once ran here, or choirs sang. The silence now was thicker, not cruel, just resigned. At midday, she ventured toward the well. That's where she found Elias Boon again, chopping wood in front of the house, once meant for her. "You're welcome to it," he said, not looking up. "The house, I mean. It's yours by letter and law. Tobias left it in your name when he filed the bride papers. Guess he wanted to give something, even if he didn't make it to the end." Clara stared at the weathered porch. One shutter dangled, the roof sagged. "I'm not ready for a house," she said quietly. "Not yet." He nodded. No offense taken. Later that evening, a storm rolled in. The chapel roof, patched only by hope, and stubborn nails began to leak. Clara placed tin cups under the drips, listening to each plink like a metronome of everything she'd lost. When a crack of thunder shook the rafters, she startled not from fear, but memory. Her father's shouting voice used to ride thunder like a chariot. It had taken her years to stop flinching in storms. That night she didn't light a candle. Just sat in the dark, tracing the rim of a teacup she hadn't the leaves to fill. The next morning she found something else on the chapel steps. A wooden box. Inside matches a clean kerchief, a bar of soap, and a jar of canned peaches, preserved with care, sealed tight. No note. Only the knowing that someone had noticed what she didn't ask for. She carried the box to the house she'd refused. Not to stay. Not yet. But to leave a loaf of bread on his porch, wrapped in a cloth she'd stitched from scraps of her travel dress. A reply without reply. That evening, as the sun bled soft gold across the ghost town, Elias appeared again. He stood at the chapel threshold with his hat in hand. "I won't ask anything of you," he said, "but if it'd ease the quiet, you're welcome at supper." Clara looked at him a long while. "I've lived in rooms where words were shouted," she said. "A quiet table sounds kind." They didn't speak much that night, but they chewed the same bread and passed each other the stew pot like a prayer. Later, when she walked back to the chapel by lantern light, she realized something had shifted. It wasn't safety yet, wasn't even trust, but it was the beginning of being regarded. But when kindness keeps knocking, even walls built from old grief begin to lean. The days folded into each other like pages in a worn book, and Clara Wren no longer counted them. She still slept in the chapel, but now the broom leaned inside and Flower's stubborn little wild ones bloomed in a tin cup on the altar. The wind came through the gaps in the wood, but it wasn't cruel anymore. It was just wind, passing through same as she was. But maybe not just passing. She and Elias Boon had settled into a rhythm. Not a friendship exactly, something gentler, less named. She mended torn shirts and he never asked where she got the thread. He left jars of beans and never asked if she could cook. They passed things to each other, food tools, silence, glances. And sometimes they passed a kind of peace. One morning he found her scrubbing the town's old storefront windows. Why, he asked, not with judgment, just soft wonder. Clara shrugged. Because dust only wins when no one lifts a hand. That day she cleaned 3 windows and fixed a broken shutter on the bakery with nothing but twine and determination. That night Elias left something new at the chapel door, a folded map hand-marked with Wells paths and the name of every building in town. The store, the blacksmith, the empty homes. He'd taken the time to remember what this place had once been, and in doing so reminded her she still had the right to imagine. That was the night Clara stepped fully into the house meant for her. She lit a lantern, aired the bedding, and sat by the hearth that hadn't seen fire in years. In her lap lay an old recipe book. Its pages were missing, the cover torn, but the spine still held. So did she. The next morning she made biscuits, and when Elias walked by, she opened the door without knocking. "I don't serve coffee," she said, wiping flour from her cheek, "but I can offer you quiet company and warm bread." He removed his hat. "That's more than I've been offered in a long while." As they sat together, the house didn't feel borrowed. It felt reclaimed. Outside, 2 crows cawed from a broken steeple, like old women gossiping. The sun reached through the window like fingers blessing the table. And for the first time in many winters, Clara Wren laughed, not from politeness, but from the deep place inside that still believed in mornings. But even healing hearts are tested when ghosts return. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that started honest, bright, windless, with biscuits rising in the oven and birds gossiping on the chapel roof. Clara Wren had just hung a row of freshly washed linens behind the old general store when a sound struck the town like thunder. Hooves, too many to be friendly. She stood still, sun in her eyes, apron fluttering against her legs. Dust bloomed at the far end of the road, and out of it came a man on a chestnut horse flanked by 2 others. The leader was dressed sharp, not frontier ragged, but trimmed and pressed like someone who used the word possession more than partnership. She knew him the moment he tipped his hat. Harlan Crow, the man who had written her the letter, the man who had never come. And now here he was, bold as day, standing in her ghost town like it was still his to claim. "Well now," Harlan said, voice like oil over gravel. "You made yourself right at home, Miss Wren." Elias Boon had come from the stable by then, walking slow but steady, his eyes locked on Clara, as if she might boulder break. She didn't. She stepped forward. "I was invited here under false promise," she said, "and left like an unwanted stray." Harlan chuckled. "You were always too dramatic. I changed my mind, that's all. But I see you found other arrangements." His eyes flicked to Elias, then to the chapel, then to the house with the warm chimney smoke curling out. "Somebody's been playing house," he said. Elias took a step forward. "This isn't your town anymore, Crow. You left it to rot." She didn't. The air cracked like dried timber. "I came back because I heard you were reviving it," Harlan said, not bothering to hide the sneer. "That makes it valuable again." Makes her valuable again. That word hit Clara like a nail. Valuable. Again. As if her worth depended on someone else's use. "No," she said, voice low but strong. Not again. Not ever. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every window she had mended, every weed she'd pulled, every pot of stew she'd stirred was louder than any shout. You sold your rights to this place when you walked away, she said. And you sold your right to me the moment you left me at that station. Harlan's smile cracked. You're still my fiancé, technically. I was never yours, she answered. Just your convenience. Elias Boon stepped closer, not in front of her, but beside her. And Clara realized that was all she had ever needed. Someone who didn't speak for her, just stood with her. Harlan scoffed, turned his horse. You'll regret this, he said over his shoulder. This place won't last. But Clara just turned to Elias, who said nothing, only looked at her the way the mountains did, still enduring, with room for everything. And that night, as she boiled water for tea, she whispered to the old walls of her house, let him be wrong, but can healing hold when old wounds are freshly reopened? Clara Wren didn't sleep that night. She sat in the old rocking chair beside the fire, not rocking, just holding a cup of cooling tea and watching the shadows shift on the walls she had washed and warmed and claimed in her own quiet way. The words Harlan Crow had left behind clung to the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. This place won't last. He was wrong. But he had also planted a seed, and seeds Clara knew were tricky things. Some grew weeds if left alone. Some unexpectedly became wildflowers. When morning came, Clara dressed in her soft brown skirt and the shawl she had brought all the way from Indiana. She swept the steps of the chapel like she always did, lit a candle inside just one, and left it burning in silence. She wasn't praying. She was remembering that she had come here alone, that she had been left, that she had built something out of nothing, not once, but every single day. And now maybe it was time to choose. That afternoon, Elias Boon found her out by the wild fence where the land rolled soft and open beyond the town's edge. He carried no tools, no saddle, just a thermos of strong coffee and that way of standing that said he'd stay even if she didn't speak. I was thinking about the garden, she said without turning. There's good earth under all that ash. He nodded slowly. You're good at bringing things back. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. So are you. They didn't talk about Harlan. They didn't need to, because the past had walked in and seen what it could not ruin. Because the girl who'd once been handed off, forgotten on a train platform, had chosen not to be handed again. That evening, when a wind kicked up through the broken window panes of the old mercantile, Clara and Elias went to board them shut, together. They moved like two people who had once walked alone for too long, now discovering that healing sometimes sounds like a hammer, sometimes smells like bread, baking in a kitchen that used to be cold. Later over supper, Clara finally said it. I don't want to go anywhere else. And Elias Boon, his voice almost smaller than hers, replied, I hoped you'd say that. The ghosts of the town stayed quiet that night, and in that hush, Clara let go of what never saw her. But if the past has finally loosened its grip, can love step forward without fear? They didn't call it a wedding. There were no rings, no preacher, no lace-covered altar. But when the last frost gave way to soft-tilled earth and the chapel bell rang just once, not because someone pulled the rope, but because the wind had pushed it kindly, Clara Wren stood in the doorway of what used to be a forgotten church, holding a loaf of bread wrapped in a linen cloth. And Elias Boon, in his Sunday shirt and still-worn boots, met her on the steps with a mason jar of early lilacs. They exchanged no vows, only looks. Only the silent agreement between two people who had already kept promises no one else ever saw. Spring came slow to Idlebrush. The apple tree they'd thought too brittle to bloom showed one stubborn pink bud by mid-April. The fence got mended in uneven patches, none of them straight but all of them strong. And one by one, strangers stopped being strangers. A widow and her boy passed through and stayed drawn by the light in the windows. A tinker returned, offering help instead of news. A young school teacher arrived without invitation, and Clara handed her a key. The ghost town wasn't empty anymore. Not because it had grown loud, but because people found something there, something small, safe, and quietly holy. They found Clara, who still wore her hair in a low bun, and baked 3 loaves, even if only 2 were needed. They found Elias, who never spoke more than he had to, but built chairs with wide arms and left kind notes carved into their undersides. And together they found time. Not time to chase, not time to regret, but time to live into. On the first warm night of June, Clara stepped outside the chapel to sit beside Elias on the porch swing he'd finished that morning. They didn't speak, not right away. They just watched the horizon. Then he reached over without ceremony and took her hand, not to ask, but to rest. And when the wind stirred the grass, it sounded almost like a voice saying, "Stay." Clara Wren didn't cry. But her heart did something softer. It unfolded. She was left behind, but she stayed, and in staying became the beginning of something new. Would you like to hear more stories like Clara's? Sometimes a door doesn't close because we've made a mistake. It's because we're led to find our true place. Clara Wren didn't come to Idlebrush to save her town. She brought only a small hope frayed at the edges by disappointment. But it was from that place of abandonment that she rebuilt the things no one else dared to touch: trust, warmth, and home. This story isn't about the extraordinary. It's about the patience of broken souls and how small kindnesses can brighten a seemingly dead place. Perhaps you've stood in the midst of some ruin in your life, a broken dream, a failed love, a place where no one welcomed you. If so, I hope you remember this: true strength lies not in never falling, but in choosing to get up gently, little by little, for yourself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you want to see more healing journeys like this, please subscribe to the Nun Wild West Saga channel. Share this video with someone you think needs a ray of hope, and let me know in the comments, do you want to see Clara again? Or do you want me to tell you about another woman who is also quietly going through a broken heart to find something more gentle than love? See you in the next story.